Quo vadis? Where are you going? This Latin phrase that I learned as a girl applies to the question I pose to you all today. What is the end of education? What is its purpose? Consider the following scenario found in Harper Lee's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. The remainder of my school days were no more auspicious than the first. Indeed, they were an endless project that slowly evolved into a unit, in which miles of construction paper and wax crayon were expended by the state of Alabama in its well-meaning but fruitless efforts to teach me group dynamics. What Jem called the Dewey Decimal System was school-wide by the end of my first year, so I had no chance to compare it with other teaching techniques. I could only look around me. Atticus and my uncle, who went to school at home, knew everything. At least, what one didn't know, the other did. Furthermore, I couldn't help noticing that my father had served for years in the state legislature, elected each time without opposition, innocent of the adjustments my teachers thought essential to the development of good citizenship. Jem, educated on a half-decimal, half-dunce-cap basis, seemed to function effectively alone or in a group. But Jem was a poor example. No tutorial system devised by man could have stopped him from getting at books. As for me, I knew nothing except what I gathered from Time magazine and reading everything I could lay my hands on at home. But as I inched sluggishly along the treadmill of the Macomb County school system, I could not help receiving the impression that I was being cheated out of something. I was what I knew not, but yet I did not believe that 12 years of unrelieved boredom was exactly what the state had in mind for me. Now, what Scout is describing here in this fine piece of historical fiction is the transition that took place in American public schools when John Dewey's ideas about education were adopted as standard teaching practices across the country. According to Kern and Veith, co-authors of the book Classical Education, the Movement Sweeping America, John Dewey was the most important modernist education theorist. He believed it more important to teach the process of learning than the content of what was learned. His ideas have resurfaced in one form or another in every national education initiative ever since, including the Common Core state standards, which, according to their official website, are designed to ensure students have prepared for today's entry-level careers, freshman-level college courses, and workforce training programs. Now, a college education and a job are good things in themselves, but is the purpose of education merely to prepare students for these things? Is this the only answer our modern system of education provides? What did the educational landscape look like before Scout's Dewey Decimal System and the Common Core? What came before was classical education. Now, I claim that classical education is a philosophy of education that is superior to modern progressive ideas, for it coincides with human nature and cultivates human happiness. Now, before I compare and contrast the classical and modern ideas of education, let us define what the term means exactly. Classical education is a time-tested method with a 2,500-year pedigree, writes Dr. Andrew A. Campbell in the Latin-centered curriculum. Accordingly, it had its beginnings in the culture of ancient Greece. Thus, classical education can be described as an education that passes on the riches of Western civilization to the upcoming generation. In a classical education, one would find students studying subjects like classical history and literature, advanced mathematics, and Latin and Greek. For example, the students in the upper school, which is composed of the 7th through 12th grades at the Highlands Latin School in Louisville, Kentucky, are taught a curriculum that includes a year-long reading of Dante's Divine Comedy in the 11th grade, a study of pre-calculus or calculus by their senior year, and a mandatory Latin sequence. Teachers will also use what one might call traditional teaching methods that are inclined towards repetition, lecture, and question-answer sessions in which individual subjects are valued over unit studies, and students are expected to engage more with print material than visual mediums. The goal is multum non multa, but not many, but much, as Dr. Campbell states. In other words, classical education wants to ensure students plumb the depths of the very best ideas and the most worthy of knowledge, so they might become virtuous and wise. So, how did classical education begin? As the name implies, classical education was conceived in the classical cultures of Greece and Rome. Tracy Lee Simmons writes in his apology for studying the classical languages, Climbing Parnassus, that the Greeks and Romans made sure to teach their offspring not only the practical skill for getting along, they made them memorize poetry commemorating the deeds of their mythological and historical heroes. They filled their children's minds with useless information by rote with one purpose among others, to make them members of a people, to make them one. So after the fall of Rome, classical education was preserved by Christianity, and during the Middle Ages, classical education developed into what are known today as the 7 liberal arts. The language arts trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the mathematical arts quadrivium of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. These arts dominated learning and were embedded in the new universities, as Hansen and Heath write in their book, Who Killed Homer? And so, classical education continued on through the Renaissance and Enlightenment and played a pivotal role in early American history. But it was not to last, for classical education began its century-long decline around the time of the Industrial Revolution, when practical subjects and specialization began to make demands upon the general populace. However, one man in particular promoted classical education's elimination: John Dewey. Dewey lived towards the end of the 19th century and during the first half of the 20th century. He thought a great deal about education and wrote a book, in fact, called How We Think. He made the audacious claim that only the already experienced can be symbolized. But if one adopts this view, then one denies the human imagination and its capacity to form schemas to understand truths it has not experienced firsthand, right, explains Anthony Esselin, professor of English at Providence College. Therefore, teaching subjects like literature, history, drama, and philosophy are pointless, for they focus a great deal on such situations. Thus, Dewey abandoned any claim to be able to know what was permanently good, true, and beautiful, say Kernan Veith. This all trickles down into a concept E.D. Hirsch Jr. labeled educational formalism in his national bestseller, Cultural Literacy, What Every American Needs to Know, which he wrote in the 1980s in response to the country's general dearth of common knowledge shared among its populace. Hirsch states that educational formalism holds that reading and writing are like baseball and skating. Formalism conceives of literacy as a set of techniques that can be developed by proper coaching and practice. This is problematic because educational formalism emphasizes the skill of learning over the content of what is learned, implying that it does not matter what kind of knowledge is acquired as long as one can access information. Now, America finds itself facing the newest national education initiative, the Common Core. And indeed, it would seem that perhaps the Common Core state standards seek to remedy the problem of educational formalism. After all, according to the official website for the standards, their stated purpose is to establish clear, consistent guidelines for what every student should know and be able to do in math and the English language arts from kindergarten through 12th grade. However, the standards fall short of classical education's explicit goal to pass on a culture, as Martin Cawthron, editor of the Classical Teacher magazine, would put it, because of their focus on the acquisition of skills disconnected from a coherent body of knowledge. Thus, the Common Core is just another guise of educational formalism. To see it, let us examine the standards for English language arts and mathematics. Looking first at the ELA standards, Karen Epley writes in the Journal for Adolescent and Adult Literacy that the Common Core document and the publisher's criteria argue that the singular purpose of reading literature is to extract information, thus excluding the possibility of conversing with the author and contemplating his or her ideas. Also disconcerting is the standard's de-emphasis on narrative writing because, according to the Common Core, there are only 2 reasons to write: to prepare for college or for employment. When it comes to mathematics, the problem lies not so much in what the math standards present as in what they neglect. First, it seems that these standards expect children to progress at an unprecedented rate through the primary years, states Laura Main in the Early Childhood Education Journal. Also troubling is that nothing can be found in the Common Core's official website that promotes the study of calculus in high school, which highlights the pragmatic bent of the standards that regards math as being merely useful, a tool. However, math is so much more. For there surely must be something to be said for a study which did not begin with Pythagoras and did not end with Einstein, but is the oldest and youngest of all, argues J.H. Hardy in A Mathematician's Apology. Yes, Hardy writes, math is not merely useful, but worthy for its own sake, because it contributes to the collective body of human knowledge. Hence, it ushers the student into a deeper understanding of truth. So thus far, you've seen both the histories and philosophies of classical and modern education, including that of the newest educational initiative, namely the Common Core. You may agree that the Common Core does exhibit serious flaws, but may wonder exactly why a classical education would be better. Well, because classical education is an education in wisdom and virtue, Barton Cawthorne affirms, that can foster true friendships, for being virtuous and being a true friend are necessarily connected with each other, argues Dr. John Cuddeback, professor of philosophy at Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. And what are true friends? Cuddeback defines them as those who love the other in the sense of wanting what is best for them. Classical education imparts to students a common culture rather than the Common Core skill set. And this common culture is an immersion in the best that has been thought and said, states Cawthorne. Therefore, students are taught both intellectual and moral virtues via classical education by their study of the good, the true, and the beautiful. This makes possible the good life true friendship provides, because it is the virtuous person, and only the virtuous person, who really has the ability to desire and pursue the good of another person, argues Cuddeback. So, what is the end of education? It is the cultivation of love. Education's end is to impart to each pupil a love for what ought to be loved. Its crowning glory is to nurture love within the soul for our fellow human beings. If education accomplishes this, then it has succeeded and satisfied its end. Classical education does indeed achieve this. Modern education does not, because it lacks cultural substance and therefore cannot create community or teach us what to love. Quo vadis, what educational path shall we take?